The loading dock at the Buffalo Trace Distillery in Frankfort, Kentucky is silent at 6 in the morning. The trucks that should be backed against the bays sit in a cold row across the lot. The drivers stand beside them with paper cups of coffee. The barrels bound for Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and Halifax are stacked inside the warehouse, untouched. The pallets of bourbon, rye, and Tennessee whiskey that should be moving north under contracts signed 18 months ago remain wrapped in plastic, still tagged with Canadian Provincial Liquor Board purchase orders, still going nowhere. Not because of a strike, not because of a customs error, not because of a logistical delay. They are going nowhere because every provincial liquor board in Canada, all 10 of them, simultaneously delisted every American alcohol product from their shelves and warehouses 9 days earlier, voiding contracts worth approximately $3.1 billion annually. Gene, the senior export manager at the Frankfort Distillery, a Kentucky man who has worked the American bourbon export business for 32 years, said something to a Louisville Courier-Journal reporter that no American distilled spirits executive had ever said on the record before. "We have shipped bourbon to Canada every week of my career," he said. "Every single week for 32 years. As of last week, we have shipped nothing. The orders are not pending. The orders are not delayed. The orders are gone. And the contracts that replaced them, the contracts the Canadians signed instead, those are Irish, Scottish, French, and Mexican. Not American. We are not coming back next quarter. We may not be coming back ever." That is the sound of a $22 billion mistake. And it began with a single sentence shouted in a driveway. The setting was a Wednesday afternoon press exchange outside the West Wing. A reporter from a Washington trade publication asked a careful question. There were reports that Canadian provincial liquor boards had begun internal discussions about removing American bourbon and other distilled spirits from their shelves in response to the latest round of tariff threats against Canadian dairy, lumber, and aluminum. The president stopped walking. He turned toward the cameras. The answer left the script almost immediately. Canada, he said, was going to ban American bourbon. Carney was going to ban American whiskey. He should let him try. American bourbon was the best in the world, Kentucky bourbon, Tennessee whiskey, and Carney could not hurt the industry by banning it. He would only help. American spirits could be sold somewhere else, anywhere else, because the whole world wanted them. Canada, he continued, was frankly overrated as a market. Very overrated. Canadians drank hockey beer, cheap hockey beer. They did not appreciate fine American spirits. They never had. And if Carney wanted to ban American bourbon, he would ban Canadian alcohol by Tuesday. All of it. Every drop. An executive order. Furthermore, he would impose 100% tariffs on every Canadian product crossing the border. Lumber, steel, aluminum, dairy, oil, gas, everything. Because Carney thought he could play this game, and he could not play this game. Without America, he concluded, Canada was nothing. The remarks were captured by every camera on the driveway and aired live across Canadian morning newscasts. They were transcribed and distributed to every provincial premier within 40 minutes. The Premier of Ontario issued a statement before the President's motorcade had cleared the South Lawn. The Premier of Quebec issued a statement before lunch. The Premiers of British Columbia, Alberta, Nova Scotia, and every other province issued coordinated joint statements before the close of business, all containing variations of the same 5 words. Bourbon stays off the shelves. Overrated. Grateful. Without us, Canada is nothing. These were not the words of a president defending an industry. They were the words of a man who had never walked through a rickhouse in Bardstown in August, never tasted the difference between a 4-year and a 12-year barrel, never read a Canadian Provincial Liquor Board procurement contract, and had apparently never understood that the Canadian alcohol market was the second largest export destination for American distilled spirits on the planet, after the European Union, larger than every Asian market combined, larger than every Latin American market combined, larger than every African and Middle Eastern market combined. They were the words of a man who believed that calling something overrated was sufficient to make it so. Within 72 hours, the response came. Not 72 days, not 72 weeks, 72 hours. The response did not come from Carney directly. It came from a coordinated press conference held simultaneously in 10 provincial capitals, with the Prime Minister appearing by video link from Ottawa for a closing statement. The chairs of all 10 provincial liquor monopolies stood at podiums in Toronto, Quebec City, Halifax, Fredericton, Charlottetown, St. John's, Winnipeg, Regina, Edmonton, and Victoria. They read identical statements in coordinated rotation, in English and French, beginning at exactly 10 o'clock Eastern Time. The chair of the Liquor Control Board of Ontario read first. Effective immediately, she said, all American distilled spirits, wines, and beers had been delisted from the LCBO's retail network. American products would not be restocked. Existing inventory would be returned to suppliers at supplier expense. Contracts had been voided under force majeure provisions activated by the official trade hostility declared by the Government of Canada that morning. The shelves previously occupied by American products had been reallocated to producers in Mexico, the Republic of Ireland, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and Canadian domestic distilleries. The chair of the Société des Alcools du Québec read next, in French and then in English. The remaining 8 provincial monopoly chairs followed in rotation. Each statement was identical in substance. Each was delivered in the calm, technical register of a quarterly inventory adjustment. None of them mentioned the president by name. Then Carney appeared on the screen. The Government of Canada had not asked the provincial liquor boards to take this action, he said. The boards had acted within their own jurisdictions, in coordination, in defense of Canadian commercial dignity, and the federal government supported them. In parallel, the Canadian Border Services Agency would impose immediate inspection requirements on all American alcohol entering the country. Canadian airlines, hotels, restaurants, and federal facilities would remove American alcohol from their inventories. Additional measures across other sectors were drafted, reviewed, and ready should the United States proceed with the tariff threat announced from the driveway. He paused. He looked directly at the camera. The President of the United States said today that without America, Canada is nothing, he said. Canada has heard him. Canada disagrees. Canada will demonstrate the disagreement, not with words, with shelves. The line traveled around the world within 90 minutes. The damage landed in 4 states simultaneously. In Bardstown, Kentucky, the chief executive of a distillery cooperative representing 12 producers received notification from the LCBO that contracts totaling $410 million annually had been voided. The cooperative had been shipping to Ontario for 67 years. The notification arrived as a single PDF attachment at 10 in the morning. The chief executive, a 5th-generation Kentucky distiller named Daniel, whose family had been making bourbon in Nelson County since 1894, sat at his kitchen table and read it 3 times. He drove to his office. He assembled the 12-member distillery owners on an emergency conference call. He told them the Ontario contracts were gone. He told them that Quebec, British Columbia, Alberta, and the 7 smaller provincial boards had also delisted. He told them the total Canadian export market, worth approximately $720 million annually to the cooperative, had disappeared in a single morning. He told them, voice quiet, that he did not know how to make payroll for the next quarter without the Canadian revenue. One of the member distillery owners, an 81-year-old man whose grandfather had distilled bourbon during Prohibition for medicinal export, said only one sentence. A president who has never tasted our product just told the world we are overrated. I have made bourbon for 63 years. I have nothing else to say. In Lynchburg, Tennessee, the executive vice president for international markets at the largest American whiskey producer by volume received parallel delisting notifications from all 10 Canadian provincial boards within 2 hours of the press conference. The company had been shipping to Canada continuously since 1947. The Canadian market represented approximately 14% of the company's total international export revenue. The executive flew to Toronto the following morning to request emergency meetings with the Ontario and Quebec liquor boards. He was politely informed at the airport that no meetings were available, the delisting decisions were final, and his return flight had been booked by the consulate as a courtesy. He returned to Tennessee that evening. The company suspended a planned $480 million capacity expansion. 640 Tennessee distillery, bottling, and logistics jobs were eliminated. In Napa Valley, California, a coalition of 47 premium wine producers with combined annual sales to Canadian provincial boards of approximately $360 million received simultaneous delisting notifications. The coalition chair, a Napa winemaker named Marie, whose family had operated their vineyard since 1973, drove to her vineyard office in the rain on a Thursday morning. She read the 10 provincial notifications. She walked out into the vineyard and stood between 2 rows of Cabernet Sauvignon vines for 40 minutes without moving. She returned to her office and called her board of directors. She told them that the Canadian market was the second largest single export destination for premium California wine after the United Kingdom. She told them the loss would translate into a 15% revenue reduction across the coalition. She told them planned hiring of harvest crews and bottling staff for the next season would be suspended. 2,400 California agricultural and winery jobs were directly affected. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a craft brewery that had spent 12 years building Canadian distribution, with annual exports of approximately $80 million, received notification that all provincial board contracts had been terminated. The brewery's chief executive, a third-generation Wisconsin brewer named Steph, stood before her 290 employees on a Friday morning. She told them the Canadian market had represented 11% of total revenue. She told them 24 positions would be eliminated, with severance effective in 30 days. She told them she was sorry. She told them she had voted for the administration. She told them she would not vote for it again. The scale of the delisting was deeper and more constitutionally engineered than the initial press conference had suggested. Canada is the second largest export market on the planet for American distilled spirits, with annual bourbon, whiskey, and rye exports exceeding $3.1 billion at wholesale. It is the third largest export market for American wine, with annual sales exceeding $1.4 billion. It is among the top 4 export markets for American craft beer, at approximately $900 million annually. Combined, the American alcohol export market to Canada represents approximately $5.4 billion per year, supporting an estimated 42,000 American jobs in distilling, winemaking, brewing, bottling, packaging, agriculture, and logistics. The Canadian provincial liquor monopolies are the largest single alcohol purchasing organizations in North America. Their delisting decisions, once made, are not subject to commercial appeal. They are policy instruments of provincial governments operating under federal coordination authority, and they had been waiting, in coordinated drafts across 10 provincial capitals, for the political moment to justify simultaneous activation. This was not improvised. The preparation had been building for 18 months, ever since Canadian provincial governments began quietly drafting contingency frameworks for what they would do if American trade hostility moved from rhetoric to genuine threat. Replacement supplier negotiations with Mexican tequila producers, Irish whiskey distillers, Scottish single malt producers, French and Italian wine cooperatives, German breweries, and Canadian domestic distilleries had been conducted quietly throughout 2025. The new contracts had been signed and pre-positioned in 2026, sitting in folders marked only with date fields, waiting. The moment was provided from the West Wing driveway. The folders opened simultaneously in 10 provincial capitals. The human cost arrived in ways that no spreadsheet captures. In Frankfurt, a third-generation bourbon master distiller, also named Gene, had worked the same distillery his grandfather built in 1941 for 34 years. Both his children worked in the family operation. He coached youth baseball 4 blocks from the distillery. On the morning the delistings were announced, his daughter, the distillery's export manager, walked into his office and set the 10 provincial notifications on his desk in a stack. She did not speak. He read them slowly. He looked up at her. "Honey," he said, in the slow Kentucky drawl his customers had loved for 3 decades, "that man does not understand what he just did." We have been sending Bourbon up there since before he was born. Those people up there, they know our product. They built their cocktail menus around it. They named their bars after our brands. And he called them overrated on television. He said they should be grateful. Grateful for what? For drinking our whiskey? They paid for every drop. They paid us. They paid Kentucky. They paid America. And now they are not paying anyone, because some man in Washington who has never set foot in this distillery decided their money was not worth respecting. He told the Courier-Journal reporter later that afternoon, "I am not angry. I am tired. There is a difference. Angry, I would write a letter. Tired, I sit with my workers and figure out who I have to let go." In Toronto, a senior liquor board procurement officer named Pierre had spent 19 years managing the bourbon and American whiskey portfolio for the LCBO. He had visited Kentucky and Tennessee distilleries dozens of times. He had personal friendships with American distillers spanning 2 decades. He had attended a wedding in Bardstown the previous summer. On the morning the delistings were activated, he sat at his desk and personally signed the contract termination notices for 47 American producers he had worked with for 19 years. His hand shook when he signed the notice for the Bardstown distillery whose owner's daughter had been the bride. He told a Toronto Star reporter that evening in English with a slight French accent, "I love those people. I love their families. I love their product. The man in Washington made me sign papers today that broke 20-year friendships. I did not want to sign them. I had to sign them. Because my country was insulted on television, and my job is to defend my country's commercial dignity. I am sorry in advance to every friend in Kentucky and Tennessee whose contract I just voided. You did not do this. Your president did this. I hope someday you and I can drink your bourbon together again. Today we cannot." The political fractures arrived from a direction the administration had not anticipated: the Bourbon Belt itself. The senior United States Senator from Kentucky, a Republican who had served as Senate Majority Leader and supported the administration on virtually every legislative priority for 3 years, issued a statement within 5 days that broke a decade of internal party discipline. The Kentucky bourbon industry was one of the most important economic engines in his state. The remarks made from the West Wing driveway had caused immediate and severe damage to Kentucky distilleries, Kentucky farmers, Kentucky bottlers, and Kentucky logistics workers. The Canadian market for Kentucky bourbon was the second largest in the world. That market had now been lost, perhaps permanently, because the president chose to publicly insult the country's most important trading partner. He was asking the president plainly and respectfully to withdraw the remarks and begin the diplomatic work required to restore Canadian market access. Kentucky could not afford this. America could not afford this. The senior senator from Tennessee issued a parallel statement the same day. The senior senators from California, Oregon, and Washington issued a joint statement the day after. 6 American governors, including the governors of Kentucky and Tennessee, sent a joint letter to the White House demanding immediate diplomatic action. Over 4 weeks of cost estimates, a coalition of American alcohol industry associations projected that the delistings, combined with the federal Canadian measures affecting airlines, hotels, restaurants, and government facilities, would cost the American alcohol industry approximately $22 billion in lost revenue, canceled expansion projects, eliminated jobs, and permanent market share loss over the next 5 years. $22 billion. Because a president stood in a driveway and called a market overrated. Because 30 seconds of improvised remarks activated 18 months of patient, meticulous, coordinated preparation. Beyond the dollar figures, something had shifted that would not appear on any sales report. The West Wing driveway remarks had taught every American export industry dependent on Canadian procurement that the Canadian market could be lost in a single morning. They had taught Toronto, Quebec City, Halifax, and every other provincial capital that simultaneous coordinated action against American consumer goods was operationally possible, politically supported, and culturally embraced by Canadian consumers at rates exceeding 84% approval. They had taught Frankfurt, Bardstown, Lynchburg, Napa, and Milwaukee that an export market built across 3 generations could be replaced by Irish, Mexican, Scottish, and French competitors in a single quarter, because the replacement contracts had been prearranged, the shelves pre-allocated, the suppliers waiting. The president said Canada was overrated as a market. The market had generated $3.1 billion annually for American distillers alone, and it was gone. The president said Canadians drank hockey beer and did not appreciate fine American spirits. The Canadian provincial boards reallocated those shelves to Irish whiskey, Scottish single malt, French wine, and Mexican tequila in a single morning. The president said he would ban Canadian alcohol by Tuesday in retaliation. The Canadians had already banned American alcohol the previous Thursday. The retaliation arrived after the retaliation it was retaliating against. He tried to make the Canadian market sound small. It turned out to be one of the largest single buyers of American alcohol on the planet. He tried to call Canadians ungrateful. They demonstrated their response by buying Mexican tequila instead. He tried to humiliate a country at a press gaggle. The humiliation traveled in the other direction, paid in canceled bourbon contracts in Frankfurt, suspended expansions in Lynchburg, frozen hiring in Napa, eliminated jobs in Milwaukee, and a $22 billion invoice that would compound year by year while the loading dock at a Kentucky distillery sat silent at 6 in the morning, with the trucks parked across the lot, the barrels stacked in the warehouse, and the shelves 900 miles north filled with bottles from Dublin, Edinburgh, Bordeaux, Jalisco, and Munich.